Hi Fred, thanks for inviting me to do this. I think it's a really great idea what you've put forward here. This idea of having short exchanges, 5 minutes, and I'll do my utmost to keep to 5 minutes, but which are short and snappy, but give us time in between to actually go away and do some research and come up with the best possible arguments to respond to the person we're debating or arguing with. And I hope in our case it will definitely be a discussion and a debate rather than an argument. I think it will. So, I think we'd agreed on a theme, and you've already made a really neat video about the overall scope of this exchange. And I think we decided on Jordan Peterson speaks the truth, ? Which is, as you can see on the screen at the moment. So I want to, in this first missive, I want to put across where I stand with regard to Petersons views. For me, the truth of the matter is the following. So we've got the standard PowerPoint slides. I'm an academic, of course I'm going to use PowerPoint slides. I would say here are my key premises, and let's discuss these over the course of the next few exchanges. Peterson's concept of truth is both postmodern and anti-scientific. It is culturally and morally relativistic, for reasons of course I'll come to, but in particular it assumes that moral, ethical outcomes trump scientific positions that are supported by objective evidence. And here's the key thing, although it's written in little font size there, and if the argument is that no evidence is objective, then that's about as postmodern as it gets. And Peterson's view ultimately places the revealed truth of religious scripture on a higher footing than the scientific method. Now those are very difficult, that's a very difficult stance for scientists to take on board. Particularly when, somebody that I'm sure Peterson, and I know Peterson from what he said in the past in his videos, holds in rather high regard is Alan Sokal, who back in the 90s, as you might remember, had a very famous spoof of the whole postmodern aspects, the whole postmodern arguments, the flowery, florid language, the whole style over substance thing. I see all of that. And what Peterson is doing, I see all of that. So let's move on. Epistemology. So you mentioned epistemology a number of times. So I think just let's lay out our stall right at the start, so we're all, singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. So this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I think is a wonderful resource for philosophy. I'm not a philosopher, though I have strong interests in philosophy and indeed do a final year module here at Nottingham, which encompasses or incorporates some aspects of philosophy. Here's what the Stanford Encyclopedia has to say. Epistemology. Defined narrowly, epistemology is the study of knowledge and justified belief. It's that justified belief thing that we really need to focus our attention on. Now, we could, if you go to the Stanford pages on truth, you'll just scroll down and scroll down and scroll down and scroll down. There's very, very many, as you know, many aspects of truth. But as I say, I just want to set out my stall here, and perhaps we'll get into that fine detail later on. But it's a question of justified belief. How do we justify our beliefs, which is the most important aspect at the moment to me. So, what prompted this exchange between us was a fairly lengthy, but I would argue very important podcast that Sam Harris did with Peterson a number of months ago, 6 months ago, something like that, which is Waking Up with Sam Harris, number 62, What is True with Jordan P. Peterson. You can, if you search for that on YouTube, you'll find it. Peterson, I would say, does not do a very convincing or compelling job of putting across his position during that podcast with Harris. Now, I know many on the left might have some issues with Harris. I would ask them to put those issues to one side. Similarly, I would ask anybody listening to that podcast to try to put the ideology to one side and just listen carefully to what Harris is saying and what Peterson is saying. So Peterson says, a scientist with any sense would say, well, our truths are incontrovertible. Let's look at the results. I hope any scientist worth their salt wouldn't say that these results are incontrovertible. Science proves nothing. Science at core, experimental science at core, is an inductive form of reasoning. Sure, it relies on mathematics, which can have its deductive elements, and you have proof by deduction. But to really connect the theoretical framework, the mathematical framework. Of course, the map is not the territory when it comes to mathematics, which is sometimes forgotten as well. But to connect those two things together, you need experimental results. You need empirical evidence. And that empirical evidence relies on an inductive form of reasoning. Feynman, as ever, spoke with a great deal of clarity. It's a real shame Feynman isn't around, because I'd love to know what he'd think of Peterson's rather less clear musings on the nature of truth. I'm going to quote this at length because it's Feynman. It is imperative in science to doubt. It is absolutely necessary for progress in science to have uncertainty as a fundamental part of your inner nature. To make progress in understanding, we must remain modest and allow that we do not know. Nothing is certain or proved beyond all doubt. You investigate for curiosity because it is unknown, not because you know the answer. And as you develop more information in the sciences, it is not that you are finding out the truth, but you are finding out that this or that is more or less likely. That is, if we investigate further, we find that the statements of science are not of what is true and what is not true, but statements of what is known to different degrees of certainty. That's the very best we can do. It's the very best we can do. And if there's a mechanism, if there's a philosophy that can bring us closer to the truth without using empirical observations, without using empirical measurements, tell me what that is and tell me how you justify that belief. Coming back to the definition of epistemology. Why is that a better direction? Why is that a more justified route towards the truth than what we've got with science? For a more recent, timely, topical discussion of this idea of science not proving anything and the uncertainty that's absolutely inherent and core to science, this is a great article by Carlo Rovelli. Thoroughly recommended. Okay, back to Peterson. This is again taken from that podcast with Harris. And so then I would say, well, the proposition that the universe is best conceptualized as subatomic particles was true enough to generate a hydrogen bomb, but it wasn't true enough to stop everyone from dying. And therefore, from a Darwinian perspective, it was an insufficient pragmatic proposition and was therefore, in some fundamental sense, wrong. Let's just pause here for a second. What Peterson is saying, let's be absolutely clear, is that the fundamental scientific facts associated with the subatomic structure of the atom are somehow affected by the outcome of the technology that's used or is developed from that particular piece of physics. That depending on how we use that technology, that in, as he puts it, to use exactly his words, in some fundamental sense, makes the physics wrong. That's what he's saying. And Harris picks him up on this time and again, and quite rightly picks him up on it time and time again. Okay, so about at the hour and a half mark into that podcast, Harris then says, the rightness or wrongness of the claim is not going to be adjudicated by whether we survive as a species. Yes, this whole effort can be wisely guided or not, but whether it's wisely that should be guided or not does not change the factual legitimacy of any of those claims. And Peterson comes back with, yes, it might. That the moral, ethical framework in which the science is developed, let's be clear, he is saying can change the factual legitimacy of the science. This is what he's saying. This is as postmodern as it gets. So this is a quote from Sakal that resonates with me. And I'm a stodgy old scientist who believes naively that there exists an external world, that there exist objective truths about that world, and that my job is to discover some of them. You know, that's Sakal's mission statement. And as I said, Peterson, I think, would hold Sakal in quite high regard. Quite rightly. Back to that podcast, Harris. Our concept of the truth value of any given statement can't be held hostage to its ultimate result for the survival of the species in the end. Yes, I think it can. That's where we disagree. That, from Peterson, is exactly the type of postmodern approach that Sakal lampooned so effectively in the 90s. So I think I've already gone over time at this point, Fred. I hope I've put across at least some understanding of where I stand with regard to the idea of truth and evidence and justified belief. I'll reiterate the question I put before. If there is some better way of justifying belief than the scientific method, the empiricism of science, the trying to connect our observations and put them in a broader mathematical framework, a broader universal mathematical framework, if there is some better way of doing that, of justifying our beliefs, then please tell me what it is. Thank you.